out in a few minutes. The things from the chat will appear for Brother Sam. Perhaps at this point, while we're waiting for those to come through, and for Brother Sam to collect your thoughts together, a word of thanks to, on behalf of Helen and Susan and myself, really, to Simon and to Nicholas Allen and to Brother Sam for all they've contributed in the last few weeks. Next week it's going to be, as you know, a panel, but I think we want to express our deep thanks for, in some ways, embodying so much of what you've written, so that these are not simply words in a book, but actually living realities that you're talking about. So we want to say a very, very big thank you to you. And anything appeared yet, Helen? No? Nothing appeared yet. I'm thinking about the chat.
There's lots of chat.
There's lots of chat.
There's lots of chat.
Is there somewhere?
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute. Yes, perhaps I've not pressed the right thing. Here we are. Okay, so Sam, if you want to choose some things that are suitable, and over to you with a very grateful thanks from us all.
Okay, I'm just looking at the one here from room 15. About how to reclaim the reclamation of nature after industrial use in the Northeast, or anywhere for that matter. I mean, and there are some wonderful examples of reclamation and reuse and so on. I think the danger is we sometimes want to overdo it. I mean, we want to over tidy stuff up rather than just let it happen. I mean, actually, in time, nature takes over again, and I think it's striking a balance between having it all. I mean, I just down the road is the Olympic Park, which of course is reclaimed industrial area, and it's lovely, it's well used, but it's all a bit too nice, and it needs a little bit more sort of rough edges. And there are rough edges up the Lee Valley, I must say, but it's how to get that. We want it all so tidy and so nice that it's sort of an expression of our control. And I think sometimes we just have to allow things to take their course and to happen slowly rather than too quickly. The work of conservation is more about making room, making space, than imposing another pattern of how we think the natural world ought to be. That's part of our problem. We want to keep it under our control. It's interesting how tourism can actually kill the beauty of a place if it just, there's so many blooming tourists. The Venice and the lagoons of Venice is swamped by huge cruise ships. But as soon as the cruise ship stopped at the beginning of the pandemic, back came the dolphins.
Yes.
They just wanted space. What's the interesting thing about the linking it with the restoration, healing aspects of restoring people, and gang warfare in Birmingham and the war in Perugia, and I think that actually getting people involved in the natural world, in the world around us, in their locality, just in their locality, is a real healing thing. There are a number of community gardens which are around here, which are associated with medical GP practices, and then people are diagnosed to work in the community garden. It's a bit cheaper than medication, and probably works as well. In some cases, of course, in some cases. Perhaps we just need to, that reconnection with nature is I think a really healing thing. And we certainly found that at Hillfield. People come quite, broken people. their salvation was very often worked out on the veg patch. And frankly, it does the same sort of thing for me too. I mean, just to get out in the garden.
Yes. You may want to include Simon and Brother Nicholas too, as you feel you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, please. I
Just-
might have something. Simon, as a GP, might have something to say about that. I don't know.
I agree.
One thought just struck me in that paragraph. It talks about the urban and rural perspective, comparing the two. And I wonder whether we could perhaps do more of twinning between rural and urban areas. I often used to think that Glasshampton, in the heart of the countryside, made sense because we were kind of twinned with Birmingham, the house there in the city or the outer edge. And so, we had a good connection between the brothers, at least, of the two places. And whether, in general, that would be more of a thing to look at. We twin our toilets with those in Africa.
Yes.
So we're not likely to go and use them anytime soon. Whereas if you twinned your back garden with a place, I don't know, just 20 miles away or 100 miles away, then you might be able to share it a bit more. Just a thought.
Thank you. Just going up to the chat above that, are we taking enough action alongside our contemplation in relation to creation care? I mean, in a way, I don't know. In a sense, I believe the action flows from the contemplation and then feeds back into it. So it's just allowing that to happen. It's the contemplation is a sort of, in a sense, in a self-making space. It's a making space. It's a surrendering territory where we're not in control. And then things flow from that, both in our relationships with people and our relationship with the natural world. I mean, Nick, do you have anything to add to that or to say?
Well, just to say that I think contemplation is important. Yes, it's Richard Rohr. He always talks about contemplation and action, doesn't he? The two come together and feeding each other. But I mean, action here is weeding the path as much as listening to somebody who is in the depth of distress, who comes to escape for a weekend or whatever. So it's two things really: being attentive to a dandelion or to a living human being. Both contemplation and action at the same time, actually.
But I think in a way that for me, the contemplation is what underpins the whole thing, that the prayer is what roots us completely. And that's, we wouldn't be either radical or Franciscan if we weren't totally rooted in prayer. And so I think it's so important to start with the prayer. I mean, you might get sucked in by the action and then it leads you towards prayer, but as a way of you being called, I suppose, but as part of sort of people who are a little bit further down the journey than that, I think it's easy to underestimate the radical nature of the prayerfulness within the action.
Absolutely. The one which, how can we help others to see differently? I think it's about being alongside them. People won't see differently just by us telling them they ought to see differently. It's almost you've got to be alongside them to see differently with them. It's a. I mean, I see different.
I think we've lost Sam for the
You
moment.
lost your thought.
He's back again, is he? No.
No. You're not muted, but you're just.
Yeah, I know.
Back
Can you
on.
hear me now?
We've got you now.
Yes.
I'm afraid I have an unstable connection. Can you hear that? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that my prayer life?
Stable connection. But I think I was saying it's a bit about being alongside people. Actually, it's why walking with my friend Bob that he shows me, what's there, and he points out to me, and he shares his enthusiasm, and I think that's how it happens.
You're talking about the twinning just while Sam's looking at the list. We've in our parish we've twinned up with a group called Women Asylum Seekers Together, in which are based in London and Manchester, and we have a couple of folk who go in every week and help, and we've supported them. We've given them sewing machines, and they're all learning to sew, and which is giving them some money to come in, and we give them money, and then they come out to us for days, because some of them, it's very instructive how unconfident you are if you don't if you don't do the countryside in the UK. It just takes so much to get, even though it's only half an hour away on the train, from, that's all we are from central Manchester. Just helping people to have confidence, helping them to see in a different way that they could do things in a different way. So it's that walking alongside again, which again is part of what Francis was about. Back to you, Sam.
Following that up, Simon, we had a group of youngsters down who used to come from the parish in South London, and they were actually frightened of being in the countryside. They were frightened of the grass and the mud and everything, and were really quite sort of totally disorientated. And it took them time just to calm down in the place. It's interesting. The question about from room 5, important as local issues are, the big thing is that global interconnectedness will determine our futures. Well, yes, of course. I mean, all this is a global problem, but also, I mean, who was it who said, think globally.
Okay.
We've lost you again.
And is it working now?
Yes.
It is, but we lost most of that, Sam.
We lost you after think locally, act globally. Yeah. Other way around. Act globally, think
locally. I know we said act I think globally, act locally. Yeah, I mean, I think this is particularly with the refugee problem, which is an ecological problem. It's an ecological issue that, we have 5 refugees living in our house, and paying attention to them, caring for them, listening to them is really, really important. But actually, it's a huge, huge issue of why people come, and the inequalities and the imbalances of a global system, and the violence and the whole problems of world trade. It's all tied up. It's all tied up with that. So how it is a whole one thing, but actually just in practice, it comes to sitting and listening to a person filling in his form to try and get leave to remain in the place. And I think that's so in terms of the natural world around us. It might just be learning the names of the weeds in the pavement, while at the same time recognizing that the way the world is working and the way the ice caps are moving is a huge disaster. Can you still hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. If I go off again, please, Nick and Simon, take over, because it's
I would just, while Sam's thinking, just to say that actually we can think globally at a sort of local level. I mean, you don't underestimate the power of writing to your local MP. If the more letters they get on a topic, the more they take notice of it. So if they get 30 letters on a topic, they think, well, this proportion of my constituency thinks that, and they do actually sort of take notice. If one person writes, obviously it's much less, but if you can enthuse a load of locals to write and everybody bangs in letters, all of a sudden they think there's votes that count here, and you can change things.
And you can do it on wider scale with things like Avars, this internet organization where you sign petitions and stuff. So I wrote to Joe Biden last week. I hope you read it. I don't know if you did read it or not, but just to encourage him to let the patents on COVID vaccines be given away. But if 2 million people do that, then that does make a bit of difference.
Yeah. Do we really share 60% of our genes with a banana? Well, I can't absolutely guarantee that, but I was told it by a geneticist a Cambridge geneticist at a high table at Corpus Christi College. He might have been because it was on his third glass of port or whatever, but that's what he told me.
If you stick around with the Franciscans long enough, you get to have some good dinners. How do we live counterculturally in this world and make real changes? Well, in some ways, as we've said before, it's by doing the next thing, and sometimes it's incremental steps. I think sometimes we think that sort of living more simply or living, giving up driving or whatever is a huge sort of burden, which is really hard work. But actually, a lot of these things are really joyful. I mean, there's actually a real joy in living closer to nature. There's a real joy, actually, I would say, in for us in having homeless people in our house. I wouldn't do without it. It's a blessing. And maybe the business of cycling in wet weather. I mean, it's a bit of a pain, but actually, there's a sort of a freshness and an being in the open air is wonderful. I love my bike in London. I wouldn't want a car.
I think you can make real changes by symbolic actions, can't you? I mean, Francis always the story about him picking up a worm so nobody trod on it, a bit to one side of the path. I'm sure he only ever did that once in his life, but it was like a symbolic action. And I've been looking at the last couple of days rather, these amazing documentaries about Greta Thunberg. There's a series of 3 at the moment, if you look at them. It's just amazing what she's doing. She gets on this catamaran to go across the Atlantic Ocean because didn't want to fly. Gets there to North America, and then they moved the whole conference back to Europe. So she has to get another boat to come all the way across the pond. I mean, it's a tiny little thing to do, but it's a symbolic action, and that's what makes differences.
Yes, and when she got there, she said, "You are the children, we are the adults."
That's right. It's the St. Francis Friday, I think.
Gosh, there's some more here.
Do you want to talk a bit about direct action, Group 10, Sam?
Yeah. Well, yes, we around here we did that. XR, Extinction Rebellion, is quite a big thing, and there's quite a lot of controversy over it as well, because some people are really disrupted by it, and so you had to work out a balance of how appropriate that is. But when the Excel Centre down the road, I mean, it is literally just a quarter of an hour's walk.
Not again, Sam.
Still off.
So just while we're waiting for Sam to come back, the next one down is about how does the food we eat become a sacrament? And maybe Nick wants to comment in a sec. I think what Sam writes about in the book, and what I think I've learned, is about sort of treasuring food in the total journey. So that's food from the seed, the ground, the sacredness of all that, into what it grows into in terms of an animal or a plant, and then valuing that. I love the story in the book that Sam's written about in Hillfield, how they write on the board where all the different bits of the meal have come from, and you sort of really treasure that, you know. And they've ground their own wheat, and which, I mean, what a joy to do that. So I think it's something about attentiveness, and I think you and I can do that, who don't grow our own wheat or grapes or whatever, by not buying. We bought some blueberries the other day from Morocco, and you think, oh crumbs, the blooming air miles that those blueberries have done, you know, and they're beautiful blueberries. They made a fabulous cake, but you know, you sort of think, oh crumbs, did we do the right thing there? I think attentiveness is about that sort of really thinking through the smallness and the bits of the journey. I don't know whether Nick wants to add that, or whether Sam's back on yet.
Am I back on? Can you hear?
Yes.
We had one guy with us, Mohammed, a Moroccan guy, who was with us for a time, and he left us just before the lockdown. But when he was with us during Ramadan, and I bought him at the end of Ramadan, at the festival of Eid, I bought him a box of medjool of dates, you know, because that's the great Muslim Islamic thing, to have a date. Well, actually, a date each evening at the iftar, but on the Eid.
Gone.
Well, can you talk about the food?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he treasured every date. He had one a day. And he said, this date contains everything I need for my sustenance. The way he treated it.
Nick, do you want to jump in? Have you got a comment?
Well, just to say that, yeah, I mean, living sacramentally, I suppose it is seeing it through the cycle. I mean, I spend 2 months of the year pruning apple trees. We haven't got a huge number, but that's my little job I take up for myself. So by the end of the September, the end of the growing season, we have lots of nice apples to stew and to freeze. And we've got a freezer full of apples. So if anyone wants any, we'll gladly send it in a post, I suppose. Can't do much else with it. But we're overrun with apples. And even now, the apple blossom is all full in the trees. So I'm hoping they'll have a rest. I don't think they will somehow. I think they're going to have lots of apples. But it's good to know that what goes into the soil comes out of the soil. And that's us, that's our bodies, that we breathe in the air that the trees breathe out. We drink the water that rains down from the skies. We store the water in our roof in a rather rusty storage container for the garden. So, yeah, we're all part of the cycle, which is recycling the whole time, recycling our bodies, our food.
There's one here which I think is really important, and we're probably coming towards the end of our time, but it's from Group 7 about if we stop acting differently, I mean stop buying from other countries, I mean food and flowers and things from other countries, especially the developing world. Will that adversely affect farmers there? Well, in some ways, immediately, I suppose, yes, if everybody stopped, but actually that sort of monocrop culture in the developing world is pretty disastrous for the developing world. As we see that with the brothers in the Solomons, that when companies move in and clear fell forest in order just to take down the trees, it affects the whole economy, the whole culture of the area. It's absolutely disastrous when big firms move in and actually sort of swamp the neighborhood. It destroys a whole network of relationships. And our brothers in the Solomons are doing some really, really good work about the catastrophic effects of logging, of the logging business, the international logging business it has in the Solomon Islands. They're putting really important stuff up there, and it's going up towards to the United Nations through Franciscans International. Very, very good stuff. Are we how are we doing for time?
Got another 2 minutes, Sam, if you want to.
Okay.
Do you want to finish about direct action, Sam? Because we lost you halfway through your points on
Yeah,
that.
please.
I mean, you know, some people will be, you know, quite heroic. I mean, Jonathan Herbert from Hillfield got arrested at the last Extinction Rebellion. I mean, he rather deliberately got himself arrested because he said, I want to make that protest. I want to be able to stand up in court and say what I've done, why I've done this. It's important. And I don't have dependent children on me with me at the moment, so it's possible for me to do it, and so on. For others, just going along and, queuing up to see your MP is direct action. But actually, so is not buying palm oil at Tesco's. That's direct action. There's all forms of direct action. And I think we just have to judge how, what's appropriate, what we feel we can do, and where the Spirit is leading us, because the Spirit will lead certain people to certain things and others not to. That's okay.
Yeah.
But we are being led to action.
Yeah.
We're all being led to action.
Can
I
we?
suppose you could argue that we saw that in the early Franciscan model, and we see that in how Franciscans live now. In that some Franciscans, for example, Nick and his brothers at Glasshampton, are called to a life of prayer, as are the sisters in the Second Order, very much called, they're called to the form of action that is acting in living prayer totally in their lives. And some of us and the Third Order are an example of that, but also the First Order of living a life that is at the action end of the continuum with prayer as part of it. I think it's very helpful to see that as a continuum. And of course, you may not be in the same place all the way through your life. So you might be here some of the time and there some of the time, and then, switching along even within days of the week, for instance, or months of the year. Francis, towards the end of his life, was spending 6 months in prayer in hermitages. So he'd very much gone to this end of the continuum for that time. But the other 6 months was all activity and preaching, and then you can see how he was combining both.
Thank you, Sam. Can we say a very warm thank you to Brother Sam for this evening? We do appreciate it, Sam, and also for the contributions that Nicholas Allen and Simon have made to it. Thank you
for the questions. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
I'm sorry we can only deal with a few of them.
Yeah, but you've certainly embodied so much of what you've written, all of you. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask Helen if she'll say something briefly about next week before we go into our prayers.
Yes. Session 4 will be slightly different. Please look out tomorrow for an email with the chat from today and anything else I think that you need to know before session 4. It'll come tomorrow so that if you are wanting to raise specific issues, then you have time to do that, and the panel members have time to know about it before we meet next week. So I'm not going to say more than that just now. Just look out for the email at some point tomorrow. It won't be first thing in the morning.